So in today's episode, I was talking about the Meatmen and the record that really influenced me when I was a youngling. And today we're fortunate to have the singer, leader, and I guess head instigator of the Meatmen on the line, Tesco Vee. How are you today, Tesco?
I'm doing good, man. Happy to be here.
Hey, no worries at all. We're glad to have you. Hey, so, Tesco, before we get into the history of the Meatmen and the various projects you've been involved in, what was your early days like? What was your upbringing that led you to become leader of the Meatmen?
Well, I was raised in a very strict Christian Reform type of family in Kalamazoo, Michigan, bucolic town that it was, and it was a good upbringing, but the religion was kind of shoved down my throat. So that's kind of part and parcel with what happened to me. I kind of rebelled in kind of a big way against the structure and organized religion in general. So that kind of shaped and molded one part of Tesco V, certainly, and then just the fact that I've always been I was raised on been buying records since I was 5 years old, and music, even Chubby Checker, The Twist, which
Hmm.
dates me quite a bit, but I remember those moments when I first heard records that where I was just overcome with joy. I guess
Hmm.
fills your heart with joy. What That's what music does, and
Do you remember your first record?
my very first album I ever bought, I think, was believe it or not, was well, besides Kitty records. Well, we got Beatles records, we got Beach Boys records, but then the first record that really blew my brains was when I was 12. I got my mom took me to the Miracle Mart and bought creamed Israeli gears because she was rather naive and had no idea that it was this total acid, vision on the cover. And because I remember "Sunshine of Your Love" was just a song that I just thought was one. I still think it's one of the greatest songs ever. And so then I think I bought a Donovan record, and I got a couple of Beatles albums for Christmas, and so it was the usual suspects. But Cream was, to me, like, even at 12, I sensed greatness, and I'm a fan still.
And that's good because "Sunshine of Your Love" that's a song that anyone can learn to play. So I'm guessing that
Right.
that was. Did you start to play an instrument at that point, or were you just still a listener?
I was still a listener. I mean, I picked up the trumpet when I was in the fifth grade, and that became sort of you have to have an identity when you're in school, or you're either a jock or a freak or a band nerd, and I was a freak band nerd. And yeah, I was real good at the trumpet, so I took private lessons, and I was very good at it, and I was first chair in high school, and took lessons from a guy in the Philadelphia Symphony, and the
Hmm.
head guy at Michigan State taught me. And so, but then after, when I got into punk rock, there wasn't a whole lot of room for trumpet except on Dance to the Music on Dutch Hercules. And I played the trumpet on our cover album, Cover the Earth. We did an ABBA cover of called So Long, and Jerry Lee Lewis song ironically called Meatman, which I play the trumpet on also. So once in a while I bust it out, and
You still got your chops. Very good.
I still got my chops.
So, how did you make the transition from Donovan and Cream into punk rock?
Well, I think in high school there were some certain bands that just started to warp my sensibilities. Frank Zappa and the Mothers, the Fugs. I think the Fugs even more than Frank Zappa because that was just so silly, and just like Coca-Cola Douche and all these songs that we would listen to when I was in ninth and 10th grade at my buddy's house. And I started to appreciate music that had a vein of humor running through it. And then, one thing led to another, and then punk happened, and it was just this groundswell of, you don't have to be talented
Hmm.
to get up on stage and have a good time. And so
What was
when
that
I
moment? Who was that musician or who was the band that you saw that you thought, wow, I could do this?
that's a real good question, because I used to go down to Detroit to bookies to see, like, all the British bands would come through, but they were fairly polished. I mean, they were fairly mainstream, like 999 and Gang of Four and the Rosillos, and all of those bands came through. But yeah, I don't know if I had well, the Ramones, were pretty cathartic, and when you saw the Ramones, you see they were talented, but there was a kind of primal downstroke guitar, and just it's real basic. And I mean, you can't. There's no denying that reduced it all to its most essential elements: three chords and ripped up jeans. And I mean, buying that first Ramones album, I just saw it on the rack. Back then you just had to buy records because of the way they looked, and sometimes you got burned. And then with that one, it's like there's no way this record sucks. And I remember taking it home and just I thought it was going to be like the Standells or the Chesterfield Kings kind of thing, and I threw it on, and it was just like, well, blown away, of course.
So that was, I'm suspecting that's high school era. Did you start playing with the band then, or did that come later on?
No, that was high school. That was like, when punk happened. I became a fan before I became a band. So I started to write my zine. I started to kind of write little bits and pieces and reviews and play with it. And writing was my forte. Math was not my forte. When I got in college, I started to write, and I even did a class presentation on punk rock, which I got a pretty mediocre grade on, which pissed me off because I had all these albums, and nobody could relate.
You put a lot of work into it, but yeah, people were still.
People were like, "What is this, Eddie and the Hot Rods and the Runaways, and what is all this horse shit?" So, because it's a bunch of straight college pukes. But anyway, in 1979, that all changed, and I was. That's when I started the Meatmen, and that's when I started Touch and Go fanzine. So I got serious about it. I wanted to write about it. I was in a one-horse town called Lansing, Michigan, and nobody else was going to write about all this music. I mean, we had the Bad Brains coming to town and playing 2 nights at Bunches, a little hippie coffee shop with hanging plants, and those that were in the know showed up, and my noise band Blight warmed them up the first night, and the Meatmen warmed them up the second night, and it's just like I look back on it now, and I'm like, we didn't deserve that. But nobody was going to write a review of it unless I did it. So it was kind of, my partner DS has a different take. We were just bored, but I believe in the higher calling. Like, we were ordained to write about this new music. It's hard to describe for people in the internet age when everything is so immediate. But back then you really had to work at it, and you had to drive to see bands, and you had to find this stuff, seek it out. You had to drive to record stores and drive to Wax Tracks and sleep in the car until they opened and get the latest releases from England. And we did that routinely on my $9,600 a year teacher salary. I don't know where I came up with the money, but I always had money for records.
You bring up a good point, because there used to be huge vacuums of information, and you didn't know even when a band was coming out with a new record. You'd show up at the record store and boom, there's something there that wasn't there yesterday, that you had no idea was coming. These days the artists are tweeting, and they're doing these big marketing campaigns, and you pretty much know something's coming. But yeah, it was kind of nice to have those sort of surprises.
Right, exactly. I think, and then Ian MacKay, I did an interview with him for the Touch and Go book when it came out in 2010, which is just a compendium of all the zines, and then flyers and reminiscences from various, not to drop names, but like Keith Morris and Henry Rollins, and they all wrote, forwards for the book. But Ian just has this, beautiful sense of how it all went down and how connect the dots it was, and how he remembers seeing a copy of Touch and Go in a record store in Arlington, Virginia, and picking it up and seeing Lansing, Michigan, and being surprised because it was a kind of a coastal phenomenon at that time, and he was like, it was connect the dots. It was letter writing. It was making those illegal phone calls we used to make on the corporate 800 numbers, and when a half an hour phone call cost $30 or $40, and it was connect the dots, and it was writing letters to the Minutemen and getting sending them a copy of Touch and Go and getting their latest 7-inch in the mail, and it was an awesome time.
Yeah, and fanzines really filled that void, or did their best to. I remember getting fanzines, and you would read them really cover to cover. Every inch would be would have some sort of information you would grasp onto, and it all added to the mythology and the legend of the bands at the time. So
Right.
So you started Touch and Go. You were doing the teacher thing, and then you started the Meatmen. That's a big docket of stuff to do each day. How did you balance it all?
Yeah, maybe at the loss of a little of my teaching, but I mean, I was a good teacher, but I probably was. I was rushing home at lunchtime. I actually got Melody Maker and New Musical Express delivered to my house every week, so I could keep up with what was happening in England. And I clipped them up and used them in Touch and Go, and then I would sit there at this electric typewriter and till the wee hours. Just a cigarette, the ashtray overflowing with butts and a bottle of gin on the table, and then just tapping away, and then get up and do it all over again. But the band wasn't super active at the beginning, but when I was doing the magazine, I was a pretty busy boy.
Yeah, and I imagine it's one of those activities of passion that you want to stay up all night doing. It's just
Oh, absolutely. Yep.
yeah.
And then going to the mailbox. I still
Hmm.
have a PO box in the same. I don't have the same PO box, but because we moved to DC for 17 years, but I have a PO box in the
Hmm.
same post office, and I get one piece of mail every month, maybe, but it's kind of
Hmm.
symbolic. I refuse to close it down because it's you know what I mean. People just don't write letters. Once in a while, somebody will write a letter from prison or something, but
Send you a piece of hair or something.
yeah, exactly.
So
So,
what
but
what is
other
that?
than
What is that PO box? Let's see if we can get some of the listeners around the world to send some postcards.
Yeah, it's PO Box 26112, Lansing, Michigan 48909.
All right. All right. So you're doing Touch and Go, and Touch and Go, as a fanzine, it lasted, I want to say, 29 issues. Is that
No,
right?
23 or 24 issues. I can't recall. There was like a best of, but I think it's 24 issues.
Did it just become like too much? What made it
Yeah,
stop?
well, DS didn't want to do my partner. He moved to DC after about issue 18, I think, 17 or 18. He just didn't want to do it anymore. Kind of lost his mojo. So he moved to DC here in Arlington, and then I carried on for another 5 issues by myself, solo. And I did about, after I moved to DC in 1982, I did, I don't know, 3 or 4 issues while I was out there. That's when we started to get offset printing on the cover and try to look all fancy. We were doing like a couple thousand issues there at the end.
Hmm.
But the first issue, when we started, it was like 50 and 100 copies, so that's why it's pretty amazing that it got out. People, like you said, people read it cover for cover. But their little brother would take it, he'd read it, and a friend would come over and take it. So it would get
Hmm.
read a dozen times. So it was pretty neat, and people, like I said, it was. I remember I still have the postcard from Kickboy Face, Claude Bessie at Slash Magazine, where he said, "Thanks for the touch and go. Keep sending it, and we'll send you Slash." And that was I worshipped Slash Magazine. It was Southern California. It was Chris D from the Flesh Eaters, and it was Kickboy and all that. And I just dreamed about what it must be like to go to shows at the Mask and the Starwood and see the Weirdos and the
Hmm.
Screamers and all of the, some of those bands, those Southern California bands that are still
Hmm.
some of my favorites today.
And so you had the fanzine going at the same time. You started the record label, the Touch and Go
Yep.
record label.
Hmm.
And I'm assuming that there was some crossover there. You were doing the fanzine plus releasing records.
Yep. It was the record label was kind of born out of necessity because the Necros, who were friends of mine, and the Fix, who were a Lansing, the Necros were out of Maumee, Ohio, and the Fix were from Lansing here, and they were friends of mine, and like, no, who's going to put our single out? So it's like, I'll do it. So
Hmm.
we uh, we did 100 of the Necros' first 4-song EP, and a, we did 200 of the Fix, and those records now are. The Fix one got released. The two Fix singles got released as a double pack by Touch and Go a couple of years ago,
Hmm.
but they've sold for upwards of 3 or 4 grand.
Yeah.
There's a funny story about a lady who was a school teacher, and she it was like August, and she was out yard sailing, and she found a little record tote at a yard sale for $10, and inside of it was was the Fix first 45, and she put it up on eBay and got 4,200 for it, and because she used that money to because she needed, teachers nowadays have to buy their
Hmm.
own school supplies because that's the way it is. But I thought that was kind of a touching story.
That's fantastic. That's exactly the person you would want to find and have that sort of luck.
Exactly.
Wow.
It came full circle because I was a school teacher. I was printing touch and go on the Xerox machine in the middle of the night when nobody was in there. And I lived in fear of leaving some scandalous, photo of Farrah with cum gushing out her ears on the glass, and the school secretary, finding it in the morning. I was kind of walking the line a little bit. So
It is full circle because she got to buy school supplies, and originally to make the record, you stole them.
exactly. So it's I don't know whether that's irony or karma or serendipity or whatever it is, but
It's balance.
it's balanced. There you go.
So you started making the records and doing the fanzine, and then your project, the Meatmen, you decided, let's make a Meatmen record. How did that come about?
A couple of high school buddies and we got together. They were growing. The one guy was growing magic mushrooms in his attic, and it was right in East Lansing, right near Michigan State. And somehow we got our hands on some 6% Canadian beer. Now, by today's standards, people laugh at that, but back then it was like, oh my God, 6% beer. So we drank and did some mushrooms, and we wrote all those, early songs, "Tooling for Anus" and "One Down, Three to Go," and all of the early stuff. We just sat around and cackled and wrote, sit there with my guitar player had a Martin electric guitar, which is pretty weird, because Martin's known for
Acoustic.
acoustics. So yeah, but there we sat, and we wrote a lot of the early songs, and we recorded them right like literally a few blocks from that same house in a guy's home studio, and
Mm-hmm.
and it was, that was the Blood Sausage EP.
So you put out the Blood Sausage EP. Do you remember how many records that you made of
There
that?
was 1,000 of those.
Okay. And those 1,000 went pretty quick enough, and it sold well enough for you to say, wow, let's make this a full length LP, yeah?
Yeah, I mean, when we used some of those tracks and the recycled some of those, just reissued them, and then did the one side was live at the Mud Club, and then the other side was the songs from the Blood Sausage EP.
Mm-hmm.
So we did. That's the "We're the Meatmen and You Suck" album that came out in 1983 and still sells today. Crazy.
I see that album all over the place, and it really sticks out wherever it's at. But I
Right.
always it never ceases to amaze me. I find it in record bins in Australia. I found it overseas in Singapore. I've seen copies all over the. Any idea how many have been pressed?
Um, I want to say probably a couple 100,000. I mean, it's taken 35 years or whatever, 33 years, but it's sold well.
Mm-hmm.
Not nothing, by can't compare to
You're not doing Thriller numbers.
Discord releases. Yeah, Thriller or even Discord or SST numbers. But yeah, it's respectable. It's one of
Mm-hmm.
those albums that a lot of guys, it's a high school, you know, pass it down to the kid brother, and
Mm-hmm.
so I'm proud of it. I'm not proud of anything I've done, but that one, the early stuff's pretty crude, and
Mm-hmm.
it is what it is.
Mm. Around this time, you were part of a legendary part of television history. And let me just kind of set it up a little bit for people who may not know. In 1981, John Belushi convinced the producers at Saturday Night Live to allow the punk band Fear to be the musical guest on one week. And it's the whole activities around this have become a bit of legend. For years and years, Saturday Night Live never showed the video, but effectively, the band Fear was playing. It was unlike any band that the SNL audience or producers had ever seen. And along with Fear, they let in, I want to say, maybe 50 or 60 punks to dance in front of the stage, and you were one of them. Yeah?
I was. Yeah, you want to hear this? I guess you want to hear
Yeah,
the
yeah,
story.
yeah. Tell us how that came to be.
Well, I just happened to be at Ian Mackay's house. Like Hank, we went out there to see. I want to say it was the same time. Like I told the superintendent of schools that I lied because the show that was happening at the 9:30 Club was Circle Jerks, Youth Brigade, Minor Threat, and it was like the last day of school.
Hmm.
And I'm like, I must see this show. But the last day of school is a big deal if you can remember, because you're just you're saying goodbye to the kids, and they're turning in their books, and
Hmm.
you're hugging them. Well, you can't hug them anymore, but
You're
so I
leaving the
went to the
lasting impression at that point.
yeah, exactly. So I went to the superintendent and I said, I got my best friend's getting married in Washington and I can't be here the last day of school. And he's like, oh, that's not acceptable. You have to be here. So I had to like talk him into it. So finally he let me go. So I went out there with the Necros, with Barry and Todd, as I recall, and saw the show. That was the famous show where Ian blew his voice out during sound check. So he kind of just willed the crowd the rest of the way with interpretive dance. And he was so excited and so pumped up to blow everybody away at sound check that he blew his voice out. But anyway, that same time we were visiting, I'm like, just remember, I'm crashed out on the floor, and his phone rings, and he remembers it as somebody different than me. I remember as that Mr. Mike. You remember Mike? He was
Hmm.
an, I don't know, you might not remember. He was an odd early character on Saturday Night Live. He had like a beard. Anyway, and he said Belushi needs slam dancers. And so Ian's like, okay, hey, you guys want to go dance on Saturday Night Live? And we're like, what? So sure. So we drove up there, and I remember Henry. I think Henry was went with us, and I remember Henry Rollins was in my little Mazda 626, and he was his head was shaved at the time, and we were going through the village, and the Goombas were like, "Hey, you guys will need some weed." And then they look at Henry and go, "What are you, a Hare Krishna or something?" And Henry's just like, "Fuck you." And so anyway, that's just a sidebar, but I wanted to paint a picture there. But we end up at NBC, and it's like a who's who. I mean, you got Harley Flanagan from the Crow Mags, you got Sab from Iron Cross, you got Ian, you got me, you got John Brannon from Negative Approach, you got the Necros, and so we're just somebody brought a whole box of old 45s up to the green room, and everybody was frisbeeing 45s and sticking them in the acoustic tile ceiling, and guys were getting mohawks cut, and everybody was really working overtime to be as punk rock as they could be.
Hmm.
And so I was just kind of standing back, and I was the older guy. I was probably 20. Well, how old was I that year? Whatever that year was, I was 25 or 26.
81, I think, was the year.
81. I was 26, and all those other guys were like, 4 or 5 years younger than me. So then it came time for the dress rehearsal. So we went down to the dress rehearsal, and the producers were like, "Well, we be careful of the cameras." Well, some of the punks were getting into it with some of the guys in the front row, some of the New Yorkers with their cheese cutter hats and their sensibilities. We did not like the punk. And then when the Fear started playing, all hell broke loose. A $60,000 camera got knocked over, and so the producers basically said, "That's it. Go back to the green room, and we're not doing this." And I think Belushi, like, who held a great sway with the producers, said, "If you guys don't let us do this, I'm not going to go on." Or he threatened them anyway. So it happened. And if you watch the footage, I'm the big, tall, goofy guy that comes out like, and I'm bowing, doing the "We're Not Worthy" toward the stage. And I only survived about maybe half a song or three-quarters of a song because I was just kind of like mortified because every protocol was broken. Guys were running in, like smashing into leaving, and the microphone was bashing into his mouth, and they
Oh.
were skanking across the stage and ripping out guitar chords, and it was awful. I was like embarrassed, so I just walked back up to the green room
Hmm.
and watched it from up there. But the best part of the whole thing to me was, and this went out over the air because my wife was recording it on whatever, the video
Hmm.
cassette recorder the size of a Buick. And I still have the tape somewhere. John Brandon walks out. A guy walks out at the very end with a pumpkin, and John Brandon grabs the mic that's laying on the stage and said, "Negative Approach is gonna fuck you up." And that went out. That was pre 5 second delay. That went out over network TV, and to me, that was like about as punk rock as it gets.
Wow. So at the end of the show, the band stops playing. There's all these very confused camera people and audience
Oh yeah,
there.
yeah.
How do they then get you guys out of the building?
Well, I don't know because I had already gone back upstairs, but I'm pretty sure they. I don't know if they called the cops or what, but we pretty much all got out of there after that. My
Hmm.
one of my biggest regrets from that night was we walked by this doorway and there was this strong weed smell coming out, and somebody, one of the people there or something, just said something about John and Lee are in here, and so if I had just walked down this little hallway and peeked in, I could have had an image in my brain of John Belushi smoking a joint with Lee Ving, but I was too much of a pussy, and I didn't, because we were being herded by this doorway, and I was too much of a pussy to go down there
Well,
and
I guess in those days, being a punk, there was a danger element to it because
oh,
you.
there truly was. There truly was. And I tried to describe that to people, and they're like, "What are you talking about?" It's like some of those shows in New York, like the DC punks would come, and there'd be like there's a Dead Kennedy show that they turned into a riot, and yeah, there wasn't definitely an element of danger. Guys would wear stupid like jack boots with spurs and lop the top of people's ear off when they dove in the crowds, and yeah, it was there was definitely an element of danger, which was kind of added to the
Mhm.
anything might happen vibe.
So you're walking through the halls of Saturday Night Live. You don't know whether you're about to get. There's potential arrest. There's
Well, there's
potential
potential of getting
punches.
kicked out. The last thing I wanted, this is before we went on, I wanted to walk down and see those guys, but the last thing I wanted was get kicked out and to miss everything. So I was kind of being a good boy. Plus, I'm just I'm not exactly a wild, despite my stage persona, I'm a pretty laid back kind of dude.
Hmm.
So in that instance, I just chose the safe route and didn't go down there. But all in all, I'm really glad I went. I was embarrassed. I mean,
Hmm.
that's the overarching fact is I was embarrassed because all these people that they just seemed like they wanted to get on TV and look like a badass punk, skanking around
They wanted to
and
hoop
just
it up a bit. They wanted to play up the
yeah,
image.
they just
Yeah.
wanted to show America this is hardcore, and it was just like fuck all that. I just wanted to see Fear. I was like 5 feet away from Fear in 1981 when they were like in their prime, and
And that was one of the L.A. bands you wanted to see on the
heck yeah, they were the greatest.
in all your time of being in bands. What are the bands that have been on the bill that have almost had you a bit starstruck? You were totally stoked to play with the bands.
Well, even though they were still in their infancy, the Misfits, because we were friends with the Misfits, so we were like in awe of the Misfits, and we went to Lodi, New Jersey, and stayed with Doyle and Jerry in their basement, and went to Glenn's. Glenn was still living with his parents, and went down, and he silk screened me posters and stuff like that. So I was definitely in awe of them. I was in awe of the Dead Kennedys, and we get to warm them up. I had my noise band Blight. We had like I smeared myself with Dayglow paint. We had all these black lights and TVs set on static, and we were trying to be like, it was like total noise, like Flipper kind of shit.
Mm-hmm.
And that was a show that I was starstruck, definitely with the Bad Brains. I mean, because even though these bands weren't household names like they are now, we were already in awe of them because anybody that had heard the Pay to Come 45 knew the Bad Brains were the shizzle. So we were like in awe of all those bands. And then like when I got to see, I didn't get to play on that bill, but the Necros and the Fix and Black Flag played at this little bar in right around by not that far from where I live called Club Doobie, and fucking Black Flag with Dez on the vocals, and
Mm-hmm.
um yeah, that was a one of those nights that and I mean just X and all these bands played in East Lansing. It's like there was this frat bar called Dooley's, and all these like the Stranglers. Well, I'll tell you who I was most starstruck around, and you might laugh, but the band from England, 999. I worshipped that band. As a matter of fact, my first fanzine was called the 999 Times. It's
Mm-hmm.
just on the really crappy that shiny Xerox paper, and I went up to them. I grew a set of balls because it's not my style, but I just went up to them and they were eating dinner before the show, and I just said, "Can I ask you guys a few questions?" They're like, "Sure, mate, have a seat." And I was just like, "Oh my God!" It was like total hero worship. I was sitting with 999, and I asked them some questions, and I don't remember much about it. It was a blur, but yeah.
Is there anyone that you would like to play with that you haven't played with yet?
Um, I can't say that I can think of anybody except ABBA, but
Yeah.
that's not going to happen.
That just happened. Actually, they just played the other week for the first time in 30 years.
I know that's crazy,
There
isn't
is
it?
hope.
Sometimes I know there is hope.
So ABBA is one of your favorite all-time bands. Why is that?
You know, and I'm not one of these ABBA come latelys. I've been listening to it since like Waterloo days, way back when. It's just to me, I when I first heard it, I was like, "What is this?" So I've always enjoyed pop music, and I that's just the ultimate pop music. It's the it's just the production, the songwriting, those two beautiful girls. It's got the whole 9 yards. So I've got actually a shrine to ABBA here. I've got ABBA dolls and ABBA clogs. Somebody came up to a show in New Orleans in the 90s and found some ABBA clogs in the trash can, believe it or not, on the way to the show, and they traded me 6 T-shirts. So I have ABBA clogs and everything else ABBA. I got all their autographs and everything you can think of that's ABBA that I can get over here in the States. A lot of that stuff was like, you probably see it more than I do because a lot of it was distributed in
Mm-hmm.
Europe and Australia and not so much in the United States of the swag.
Is there like an ABBA Anna sort of thing, like Disney Anna? Is there like a collector circle of ABBA
Not,
paraphernalia?
there's people that collect it, but there isn't, it's not that I'm aware of. It's
Mm.
not that fervent, but yeah, it's fervent, trust me, but there it isn't like, it's so rare over here in America because literally that stuff was mostly distributed in Europe because they were a lot, but they had their hits over here, but they were much bigger in Europe and other countries.
I don't think it's as popular in the United States. Maybe it's getting more and more popular, but the Eurovision Song Contest, which
Yep.
is what kind of brought ABBA to the forefront
Hmm.
in the
Yeah.
'70s. It's almost not heard of in the U.S., but worldwide, it is absolutely huge.
Hmm.
So I guess maybe that's one of the reasons why ABBA is so popular in all places, seemingly all places except the United States.
Yep. That's
Um,
probably true. And then, but of course, then of late, you got Mamma Mia, and you've got the
mm,
the the Broadway musical and the movie, and
they're making inroads.
yeah, working on it.
So I'd almost say ABBA is like your guilty pleasure, but you're not guilty at all. You don't feel guilty at all
No,
about it.
not at all. I mean, like lots of people keep sharing that link on my page because everybody knows
Uh-huh.
I love them. So
Now you touched on toys, and you are a huge toy collector. Can you talk a bit about that?
yeah, I started collecting records, and then back in the late '80s, it just kind of something happened. I started to watch Get Smart reruns, and it started to occur to me, and I started to remember the toys, and I don't know the exact moment it happened, but a switch was flipped, and I just went crazy for 50s and 60s toys, and now my collection is, at the risk of sounding arrogant, it's pretty darn amazing. I just come down in the morning with a big mug of coffee and walk around my basement and kind of look at it with fresh eyes every day because I've been doing it since almost 30 years now, and just it's a passion, it's a hobby, it's the way of life. I mean, I know guys all over the world, and we trade, guys in Germany, and there's some serious robot collectors in Europe, and I look at my monkey mobile I actually got from Australia
Mm.
in the box, over eBay. So yeah, it's what keeps me sane. It's a very expensive hobby, but
Mhm.
it's just I set up at toy shows. I go to flea markets. I just anywhere, and a lot of it now is with Facebook. There's all these toy pages, and guys are just like put stuff up for sale and trade stuff, and
Mhm.
it's I've been doing it almost 30 years, and I'm just as excited to go out and hunting as I was on day one. So
Is it better with things like Facebook or eBay, or was it better back in the day before those, where you could just kind of stumble on things and
yeah, it was fun. It was like before the internet and before all the social media, I ran an ad in the Washington Post every Sunday, and that was like 2 million people. It's old toys wanted, and I'd get into old ladies' attics, and I got into some good stuff that way. But eBay is kind of like leveled the playing field. Everybody's an expert now. You see an 80-year-old lady with an eBay final auction paper hanging off of a curio, and it's just kind of like, in that respect, it's kind of it used to be kind of a secret society. Like you knew
Hmm.
what something was worth and nobody else did. So the unscrupulous of the world would prey upon that. I always try to be fair with people, and but then there's it's just like but it's also kind of exploded, and it affords you so many more ways to acquire new
Hmm.
toys that I cannot complain.
Mm. And is there anything like a holy grail you're keeping your eye out for?
Well, there's a lot of them because I'm a robot collector. So there's some robots that are holy grail that are like way out of my price range that I would be love to stumble upon. But one at a time, that's my motto. One at a time. I sort of have a credo. It's like sell the common, save your money, buy the rare, because the rare stuff will always be. People just think this stuff this it just keeps on appreciating, and it really doesn't. There's quite a few categories of tanked. Lunch boxes, board games, things
Hmm.
like that. Not what they were back in the '90s, and that's part of the reason I sold my Man. I had a Man from Uncle collection. I don't know if that show played in Australia, but it was quite popular in the
Hmm.
States. And I had virtually every toy they made for that, and I just took those all to auction because the clock is ticking on some of this stuff. Some of the '50s stuff is dead. I mean, the cowboy stuff is dead. A lot of the '50s characters are dead because the people that collect it are dead.
Yeah. The,
So it's
the the
quite,
people who would find a meaning or a
yeah.
or
Like,
fun with
what
it.
does a 30-year-old want with a Hopalong Cassidy lunchbox?
Mm.
So, you got to think about that. And that's not why or how I collect, but you have half an eye on trends and what stuff's worth now because, you don't want it to be worthless when you go to sell it.
Yeah.
So,
Okay.
but monsters and robots is my focus now. Like Universal Monsters, Frankenstein, Creature. I got a big Monsters collection, got a big Adams Family collection. A lot of weirdos, nutty mads, Ed Roth, Rat Fink, robots, space toys, all that fun stuff. Got a couple pinball. We got a Creature from the Black Lagoon pinball machine, and I just sold a Fun House pinball machine. If you know that one with that talking dummy head in it to my
Oh.
drummer. So yeah, the basement's a wonderland. So if any of you listeners are in Lansing, Michigan area, I'd be more than happy to give you a guided tour. I'll blindfold you and drive you to the site, and then escort you downstairs.
So, Eddie, in that basement, do you still have your vinyl collection?
I do. It's sort of scattered everywhere, but I still, my vinyl collection took a hit. I'll be honest when I started collecting toys, and I have sold some things. I sold all my Misfit stuff when Glenn started to become a dick back in the mid '80s. I said fuck that guy, and I sold all my Misfit stuff, and that's kind of a mistake.
Mm.
But it is what it is. If I don't like somebody or don't listen to them anymore, then I sell it. So
Yeah.
that's how it is. I have to like a band to want to keep it. I don't just keep it because it's worth money.
Hmm.
And then the Misfit stuff, now it's just stupid how much it goes for.
Mm.
Glenn just decided in '85, or right around '85, that he was going to be a rock star, and he kind of ditched all his old friends.
Is that what happened? Because yeah, there was at one point Glenn was cool, and then it seemed like the next moment people are laughing at him. What was that? What was the reason for that transition?
Yeah, well, I think there's still, I mean, I just think people like, it's easy to laugh at him because he's kind of a whatever
Cartoon.
he is now. Yeah, he's a cartoon now, but I mean, on a personal level, we were good friends, and he kind of just. I went to see a show, and I guess it was a Sam Hain show, and he was just a total dick to me. And it's just like he had flipped a switch. I remember they played a show in Kalamazoo, and my friend Kenny Knott from Violent Apathy was putting the show on, and he said Glenn was getting in the van, and he said, Kenny, no more punk rock tours. Next stop, Metallica. And he slammed the door, and they drove off into the night. So I think that kind of summed up where his head was at the time. You
Mm.
get what you get. What he was. I mean, you understand where I'm coming from here. He kind of just.
Mm-hmm.
He was going to be a rock star, and he didn't have time for this punk rock bullshit anymore.
Yeah. Oh well. Well, he's got plenty of
Yeah.
time now, I guess, to to
Yeah,
plan the new.
they finally. I was just hanging out with Jerry a couple of years ago at barbecue, and I was like, "Cause that they had just had their lawsuit, and now 2 years later they're gonna do shows together." So
Hmm.
it's amazing what the power of money will do.
So you've kept yourself really busy. The Meatmen, they were reformed, I think, around
8. Well,
2008.
yeah, well, 2007 we did a. John Brandon called me and he said, "Hey, Tesco." That's my John Brandon impression. You wanna come out and introduce us? We're doing our first show in Detroit in 25 years, and I'm like, "Yeah, cool." So then he calls back like a few days later. "Hey, Tesco, you want to do like a half-hour set of Meatmen?" I'm like, "Well, I don't have a band right now." He goes, "Well, the guys in Negative Approach will learn the songs." So I'm like, "Okay, that sounds like fun." So I went down there and we practiced a few times, and we went out on stage, and the guys in NA had like diapers and afro wigs on, and we banged out like a half hour worth of the hits, and I was like, "Man, this feels pretty good."
Hmm.
So it kind of lit the fire again, and then I got a lineup together that lasted a couple of years, and then I got the lineup that I have now. It started in about 2010, 2011, and I
Hmm.
think it's like the best lineup I've ever had. Though right now I'm on hiatus, so
Hmm.
I don't really know what the future holds for the Dutch Hercules in the musical realm, but I'm very happily on hiatus. Let's just say that.
Well, hopefully we'll see you on a stage at some point in the near future. I will say the recent album Savage Sagas was kick ass. And I would recommend to the listeners to check out Savage Sagas. You also re-released all the some recent Meatmen albums on record for the first time.
Absolutely. We put out Pope on a Rope, 500 of them on Pope's Blood red vinyl, and we put out 500 of the Toilet Slave album on Urinal Cake blue vinyl, and then we put out the Superbikes 2, which was there were actually some bonus tracks that we did in 1996 to we were going to put out the War of the Superbikes on CD, and we wanted some bonus tracks. So me and the '90s guys went in and recorded 8 or 9
Mhm.
bangers, and so the bangers, the bonus tracks, came out on a 10-inch. So
Mhm.
those are all pretty well sold out now. I still have some on my website though, if anybody needs them. The meatmen.com.
Yes.
And
Be careful, everybody, googling the Meatmen, that you don't hit the wrong link. Otherwise, some of the Meatmen stuff is not safe for work. But the hyphen Meatmen, you'll get to the band.
yeah, exactly.
All
And
right.
get straight to us. And I'm more than happy to sell you some shirts. We got the 2 down, 2 to go shirt, which is our best seller. They've
Hmm.
got the Beatles on it, and then 2 of them have glow in the dark skull heads. The 2 that are no longer with us. So,
Do you have the three down, one to go artwork ready to go at any
oh
moment?
no, we don't. But the other 2 are pretty healthy, so I think we're in for the long haul on this one.
Well, you never know. John went like that, so yeah.
Yeah.
Um, all right. So I'm going to point some links to everybody. The-meatmen.com. Make sure you pick up some of the limited edition Pope on a Rope, War of the Superbikes, and Toilet Slave LPs, as well as a copy of Savage Sagas. And a copy of the Touch and Go fanzine book. You've recreated all the Touch and Go fanzines in a single unit for people to enjoy.
Yep, 576 pages of fun. It's I'm pretty proud of that. It took us 5 years to sell it. Bazillion Points, which is a publisher in Brooklyn, have been great. They Other publishers wanted to truncate it, make it smaller. They said make it as big as you want. I got letters. I mean, Ian Mackay sent me letters that he had copies of letters that he had sent. I had mailed him, and he'd saved them. And
Mm-hmm.
it's pretty much a walk down memory lane. A snapshot of 4 years of my life, basically, when I was just a young puppy writing about the music that I so loved.
Mm-hmm. Those are the days, and thank you very much for capturing that. And also, everyone, keep an eye out for if you're new to the Meatmen, if you're not sure who they are, you want to give them a go. My entry point was "We're the Meatmen and you suck." that starts the kind of the baseline of information. It's funny, it's awesome, it's fun, and it really has been an interesting journey. A great time talking with you. Thank you very much, Tesco.
Okay, man. Thank you. Thanks for having me.
No worries.